Good evening, everyone. Tonight's show is brought to you by Audible. Go to audiblepodcast.com/iMore for your free audiobook download. It is March 3rd, 2013, and tonight we are talking about stupid Apple headlines. We're talking about widgets as innovation. We're talking about responsive design, and we're talking about Apple's real problems. This is the iMore Show. Joining me tonight is the editor-in-chief of The Loop, loopinsight.com, Jim Dalrymple. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I heard a rumor. I heard that your daughter is vacationing in the South, which for you would be Montreal.
That's right.
Speaking of hitting things with beer bottles, there was a lot of targets for you this week. I was just going through the Loop before speaking to you. And it seems like we're in the golden age of Apple stupid again. Like someone at some point pressed a big red button and everyone from the Wall Street Journal to the New Yorker to Time Magazine is writing dumb stuff about Apple.
Yeah, I really don't understand it. I mean, there are a lot of good writers out there, and all of a sudden everybody just loses their minds. And, you know, I don't know where it comes from. And Brian in the forum said Forbes as well. He's absolutely right. I mean, Forbes has just gone insane this past 6 months to a year. I think that they've had one good article. And I, you know, when I read this stuff, I'm thinking, I don't believe that the readers believe this stuff that they're writing. I really don't.
Yeah.
I know that the readers of The Loop don't believe them. I'm sure that readers of iMore don't believe them because I think that they're smart people.
I don't think the writers believe what they're writing at this point.
Well, you know, when I look at some of the writers, I have to think that they're doing it for page views. And it doesn't make any sense to me because it ruins their entire reputation. I mean, I have people argue with me about my points in an article when I say, you know, Apple isn't going to fail because I think that you know they're continuing to innovate and you know, counter to what Forbes and the Wall Street Journal is writing, and people will argue with me on those points, but they're valid points. You know, I'll carry on a conversation, but when a writer says, "Here's 5 reasons why." Apple is
fire
doomed.
Tim Cook and Apple is doomed.
You know, and I had a reporter a little while ago ask me that, you know, why? She said, "Why is Apple starting to fail? You know, with sales and their quarterly results and all this?" And I said, "Wait a minute now, I'll answer that question. You answer one first for me. Their last quarterly results, they had record revenue." They had a record profit of $13.1 billion. They had record iPhone sales. They had record iPad sales. Mm-hmm. Where is it that Apple is failing in there?
By what metric are they failing?
Yeah. So you answer that and I'll answer your question. And, you know, clearly there is no answer for that question. There's no good answer for, you know, saying that Apple is doomed. And the other thing that kind of gets me is that most of the people that are writing about how Apple is doomed and, you know, Apple is going to fail at some point, and these people are writers. Mm-hmm. They are not qualified to run $1 billion company. If they were qualified to run Apple, then I'm sure that they would go run $1 billion company somewhere, but they're not. As a writer, we are qualified to examine the news and to offer opinions, but it's not right for us as writers to make our readers think that we can see into the future so much that we know what some of the best executives in the world don't know. I mean, we can say Mountain Lion came out and it didn't have this great feature in it, and I really want a laser on my MacBook Pro. that will shoot stupid drivers in front of me, and it didn't have that. So I think that the OS sucks. We can do that. We can say that. It doesn't mean anything. So what is it that makes writers think that they know better than Tim Cook and Phil Schiller, Oppenheimer? You know, we don't know that.
See, now, to me, Jim, this is when we get together, when we do this show together, some people accuse us of magnifying our fanboyism, of being way too pro Apple. But I think I usually invite you on when there are these specific topics to talk about, because you have a tremendous journalistic background. And when you talk about it, it sort of reminds me of those Aaron Sorkin speeches in The West Wing or The Newsroom, where they talk about a time when politicians were statesmen and when writers were newsmen. I mean, I can't imagine Cronkite telling Kennedy how to run the country. His job was to inform and to provide context and to get news out to the people. His job wasn't to write it. And I was thinking about this a lot this weekend, and the only thing that I could come up with is that Apple's news has been so good for so long. They've had so many record quarter after quarter, year after year, so many great products after products, that people have gotten bored of those headlines. The dog bites man headline has become boring. And the only thing they can figure out to do to keep selling papers or earning page views or manipulating stock markets is to flip it around and do the man bites dog story, which is Apple is doomed.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's easy to say that Apple is doomed, and when people say it's coming to the point where, you know, Apple, look at the last release, the 5 wasn't that good. Okay, well, it outsold everything else. You know, so how can it be not that good?
Or to your point, why? Give me the metrics by which it's not good.
Right. And, well, it wasn't innovative. Okay, well, how about this? Typically, most companies in their history can say that they have really changed a market. They have released a product that changed the way society thinks about that category of product. And most companies do that once in their entire lifetime as a company. Apple has done it, well, about 6 times.
Yes.
to my my count. So if you look at first the computer, I mean, you can't help computer, Mac OS, you know, you can't help but count that. Then you have the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad.
Yep. Apple Retail.
Well, I didn't even count. I put in Apple Retail. That certainly changed. And iTunes is one that you can't ignore because of what it did for music distribution. That's 6 right there. You know, and this isn't just a product like the iPhone is. You don't have to say that, well, that category wasn't around before. I mean, game-changing products usually solve a problem that the users are currently having, and that's what the iPhone did. The iPad did the same thing. Apple didn't invent those categories, but Apple perfected them so that users that wanted to play music but wanted more than 10 songs on their music player could now buy an iPod and have 1,000 songs.
Yeah.
You know, that was a game changer. That made the iPod, and I don't know how many years it took, maybe you know off the top of your head, before it became the best-selling device in history.
Yeah.
That was crazy. Then Apple moved into the distribution of movies and television shows, and there's so much more. Now, for these writers to say Apple has all of a sudden stopped innovating means to me that they don't understand Apple. And they don't understand this process. I mean, why don't we say to them collectively as reporters when they say, well, Apple hasn't done anything lately? Okay, Apple has changed the world 6 times in 20 or 30 years. What have you done? You've written an article. So what? You know, and you've written an article taking down the company that has changed the world.
But even then, Apple didn't do it year after year. There were breaks between those steps.
And there has to be breaks. You release a game-changing product, and I hate using that word, but you release a game-changing product, and then you release iterative upgrades to
Yes.
that product, and that's the way that the cycle goes. I mean, look at the Sony Walkman, the Nintendo.
Yeah.
All of these products, they didn't release a game-changing product every year. They released a product, the first Walkman, and then they refined it, and then they made the CD Walkman, and they come out, and sadly, Sony didn't capitalize on all that success that they had, and that's unfortunate for them.
But I wonder if the people who say that, like Apple's not releasing these products are the same people that said, oh, the iPod is lame, the iPhone
Yeah.
can't do anything, and the iPad is the big iPhone. So it's kind of,
Yeah.
you can't win, or there's just no way to win in that kind of a press cycle.
No, and there really isn't any way to win. And unfortunately, those types of stories will get picked up.
Mhm.
By the Wall Street Journal writes something, well, then it's on news channels all over the world. And, all of a sudden Apple's in trouble because the Wall Street Journal says so. And then the stock starts to fall.
Well, that's the part that's baffling me, Jim, because we've seen for years, and you were famous by saying you're going to take their keyboards away, but there were people that are well known for link baiting or writing hit pieces just to get attention. But now it's the Wall Street Journal saying that iPhone sales are disappointing. It's the New Yorker saying that without Steve Jobs, Apple is doomed and open Google is going to win. It's the New York Times who's phrasing these things. These are papers of record. These are the company. My mother reads this now and calls me worried about Apple's future. And to me, that kind of crosses a line because it kind of betrays readers' trust at this point.
Well, and that's something that, and when I see that, I try and call them out on it. And I call them out publicly on it, either with a story, or I call them out right on Twitter.
With fantastic use of language, I might add.
and they never respond.
No.
And, you can say, well, that's because they're big and you're small. I think they know that we're right, because a lot of my followers will retweet that stuff and other people will ask them questions. They never respond.
Yeah, Gruber spent Gruber does features less often maybe than he used to, and he spent 2 of the last features just going through point by point major mainstream articles and showing not only the inaccuracies but the really low class reporting going on in, again, these papers of record.
Yeah, and I think that our readers and listeners of this program, the ones that are in the chat room right now, expect a certain level of intelligence when we say something. It's not that we have to be right; it's that we have to make sense. Mm-hmm. I can say I believe this, and somebody can come in and argue with me and argue the story, but we're arguing intelligent points. When you look at some of the things that are done with the Journal or the Times or some of these other papers, you can't even argue that it makes sense, and that's why I like to call them out, because you can't continue to say that Apple is falling, or the BlackBerry is coming back, when it's clearly not. These things are not happening.
The odd thing is one of the constant memes is that Apple is doomed without Steve Jobs, and you can't say Steve Jobs wasn't important to Apple or isn't important to Apple now, because that's like saying he would never have been important to Apple. Obviously, Steve Jobs was important, but they don't cite any. There's no evidence to suggest that anything that's happened now with Apple wouldn't have happened if Steve Jobs were still there. The product line, was several years in advance, and the stock price, while down compared to its previous high, is still up compared to when Tim Cook took over. It's baffling that these facts aren't weighed in the context of the articles being written.
Well, the articles that are being written are so far from fact that, it's amazing that they even get them passed. I don't know. Nobody can say that Steve Jobs wouldn't have allowed this. Nobody can say that, because nobody knows.
Yeah.
Steve changed his mind a lot.
Yeah.
And he was great at delivering the products that we wanted. There's no evidence to say that Apple still isn't going to do that. And when you think about it, people are are being looking forward and saying, well, I don't see what Apple could deliver that would change the world. Well, you didn't see the iPhone coming
Yeah.
either.
You
You
thought it
know,
would
you
be an
did,
iPod with a click wheel.
yeah, you didn't see the iPod coming for that
Yeah.
matter. You didn't see some of the changes in OS 10. So what makes you think that you can see what Apple's going to do next?
Yeah.
And if Apple comes out with the next product and it bombs, okay, then we can sit down as writers and say, well, this wasn't very good. Now we need to start looking at why. You
And of
know,
course, there were products that didn't do phenomenally well under Steve Jobs' reign at Apple.
sure, sure. I mean, not everything that the man touched is going to be perfect. Now, one of the products that failed under Steve is one that I really liked, and that was the Cube.
Yes.
I still have a Cube.
It was audacious.
I loved it. I thought it was a great computer, but when there's Sock Rowett on the forum says it happens. It does happen. Products fail.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the Cube should have failed. That's one of them that shouldn't have. Ping failed. It should have failed.
Yeah.
It was poor. But there are many other things that Apple does. I mean, look at their software. I mean, it's great to look at a piece of software that has all of these features and all of these things going on that we don't really understand what's happening, but we know it's very simple and easy to use. Typically, those are the ones, and as people like Stressa, and those are the ones that are the hardest because everything is in the background doing all of this stuff, and we never see it.
Yeah.
Because the program, the app was made to be simple and to do things for us. So, I get rambling.
No, that's exactly why you're here. One of the more interesting things, one of the more ludicrous things was figures released by Good Technology, which said that that iOS activations had risen from, I think, 71% to 77%. It was some range in the 70s. They were up. And the headline that resulted from this, again, in a major paper of record, was Android gains on iPad in business.
Yeah, wasn't that something? Yeah.
I'm stupefied. I'm stupefied that made it out of the writer's typewriter. I'm stupefied that made it across. There was no Perry White involved in the creation or publishing of that article.
When I put that up, I thought, and I actually sent a tweet to the Wall Street Journal and said, here are some great news for iOS and Apple. How will the Wall Street Journal make this bad? And it turned out it was the Times, I think, that made it bad. Yes. But still, I don't understand. I mean, clearly there's an agenda. And I that's why I call them out. Because I think if they have an agenda other than to report what's factual news, then they should let their customers know. I mean, come out and say, we think Apple sucks, and we're going to write stories that reflect that agenda.
Now, I wonder how much we're to blame for that. And by we, I mean the collective we, because their job, their real job, if we're honest, is to sell papers, to get clicks, or if you're a money maker, it's to make money on dumber people than you in the market. And we might be telling them that we're no longer clicking on Apple is good stories. We're only going to click on stories that say Apple is doomed. And instead of informing us, they're pandering to us.
Everybody, for the history of time, everybody has liked bad news.
Yes.
I mean, we don't sit down and watch CNN all day when there's a birthday party going on and clowns are jumping around and, everybody's happy.
Yep.
We click on it when there's a mass murder or when there's, a war.
Yeah.
That's what we click on. So everybody has always liked bad news. But what we don't expect is for them to make up the bad news.
Yes.
And that's different than reporting bad news. When you report something that's terrible, people will sit and watch, and everybody loves to see the top dog fall.
Yes.
I mean, that's human nature too. So everybody will want to see Apple not put out a good product. They'll want to see them fail with whatever it is that they put out next, and everybody will write those bad stories, and the stock will drop even more. I don't think that's going to happen. So the question then becomes, how can these people still write bad stories?
Well, I mean, it seems like they spent a lot of time building them up, and now it's decided this is the phase where they're going to be torn down, and then maybe later there'll be a phase where they're redeemed, because everybody likes a redemption story too. And it seems exactly what you said, they're servicing an agenda and not servicing the news.
Well, yeah, that's right, and that's what I'm saying. Tell us what the agenda is.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can read your stories based on that knowledge. And when newspapers have always had, the editors, remember the old days, the editors in the courtroom that would run out to the payphones and tell them the story over the phone so that they could get it out. I mean, this is old stuff. It's nothing new. It's just that we're on the web now. But I think we lost something, between the time when, 1994, when I had one of the first daily Mac news sites, mm-hmm. to now, we've lost some credibility. Not you and I in particular, but I think lot of the industry has lost a lot of credibility, because I don't think when the Wall Street Journal puts up a story and says Apple has canceled 65 million orders for iPhones, and then they go in a little while later and take out the 65 million part, and with no explanation. Well, wait a minute.
Oh, and by the way, the same article contains a rah-rah Samsung piece, at the end.
Yeah. So why did you do that? I mean, there should be an update at the bottom of every story, unless I'm fixing a typo. Yep. If I make a change to a story, I put an update at the bottom and say, this was changed to clarify, or this was wrong. And it had to be changed.
And that for the Journal, to me especially, and I did a whole show on it, so I won't recapitulate it all now. But for the Journal, to me, that was flabbergasting. That felt like, as a reader, never mind a journalist, that felt like a betrayal.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem now, is that the Journal and the Times and people like that, places like that, we expect a higher level of integrity, mm-hmm. than what you do from a blog.
Yeah.
But to be perfectly honest, I think the blogs have more integrity these days than what those people do.
I agree.
And it's sad. I mean, I would rather read something something that you wrote, or that Gruber wrote, or any other writer. I don't go to the Journal or the Times anymore, because I don't really believe what they say.
And what's funny is that we are often called biased. They use the F word, not, the good F word, but they use the fanboy word. Yet I would argue that on many occasions, everyone makes mistakes, but on many occasions, I think the reporting level that we're producing in our industry, the I don't know what the right word for it is, but the blogging industry is of a higher quality, or at least is more authentic or true to the news than what is coming out of what used to be mainstream papers of record.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And, maybe some of it is, the simple fact of the overhead, that these people need to put out articles that generate a lot of page views so that they can pay for their job, when you and I don't really have to worry about that. I mean, sure, we all like to see our stats, and we all like to see them go up, and we'd like to see that people are enjoying our writing, but that's not what pays for my site. Absolutely. So I don't worry about that as much. I put out things that I find are interesting, or when I write a longer piece, it's something that I believe. If you don't agree with me, well, that's great.
Well, that's what I like about the Loop. The Loop, to me, and some people call them link blogs, but I was never certain about that term. To me, the Loop is your commentary track on the areas of the internet that interest you. I get to read your take on music and Apple and design and web technologies and.
Well, and that's just it. It could be almost anything.
Yeah.
What
Jim likes.
Yeah.
And Peter.
Yeah. Yeah. It's basically what what hit me that day.
Yep.
It could be a YouTube video of Led Zeppelin, or it could be,
Slight dog
something
race.
about Apple. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's all part. It's entertainment. It's informative. It's everything, but it's not everything to everybody. Somebody may come in and watch the Led Zeppelin video, but not read an iPad article because they don't have an iPad. They don't plan on getting an iPad, and they could care less about it. And that's okay.
Yeah,
Enjoy
absolutely.
the video.
And you recently, I think it was this week, you turned on your responsive design. And what I liked most about it is that you didn't actually, you just took the loop the way it looks now and you made it you made it work perfectly on the iPhone.
Yeah, and it took a long time. It took a really long time. When I changed the design of the site, I guess it's about a year and a half when I changed it to the way that it is now. One of the things that I didn't do was do a responsive design. So when you go to the loop on your iPhone, it's formatted for that screen. It's formatted for the iPad.
Yeah.
So that it looks a lot better. You don't have to pinch and zoom. You still can, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
And that I made sure that the text was nice and big. So because my eyes aren't so good anymore, so I need to make sure that when I pull it up, I can see it. But I went through a lot of thought into what I wanted to do with the site before I did the responsive design. And people were asking me, why don't you do this? We'll put it in responsive design. And I kept thinking, maybe I want to do an app for the site. And if I do an app, then people can download the app from the App Store, and they can see the site formatted for the phone.
Yeah.
And maybe I could even make that into another revenue stream, and make some money for that to help support the site. And then I went back and forth with app developers on what the best way to do things. And finally, I came to the realization that this is not the best thing to do. Doing an app is not the best thing. Having people come to loopinsight.com and seeing a website formatted for the device that they're on, that is the best thing to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and there are business decisions with that too. So not only do you lose a potential revenue stream, and I don't know what that would be. I mean, maybe people would pay 99 cents to download a Loop app to help support the site. I've had people say that they would. Who knows if they would have or not. But I didn't think that was right. It's not right to ask them to pay 99 cents when I felt myself that should be free. Mm-hmm. And then, okay, so do a free app. Well, then I have the problem that, okay, well, I don't think that they should have to go download an app just to visit the site and have it be formatted properly for that device. So then I came all the way circle back to the responsive design and say, that's the right thing to do.
That solved the problem you wanted to solve.
Well, it did solve the problem. But, like I said, there are always business things in this. So, I didn't get that extra revenue stream that I might have done. And not only that, I had to pay out extra money to have somebody do a responsive design for me. But people love it.
Yep.
Everybody seems to be loving it. I haven't heard anything bad about it. I checked it out on my iPad and my iPad Mini and my iPhone, and it looks great to me. That's what I want.
And it looks like the Loop, which is like the most important thing. Yeah.
It looks like the Loop. It acts like the Loop, and there may be a few cosmetic changes coming to the mobile side. On the iPhone, where the little loop is, they click to go to the full article. Well, we may be highlighting that a little bit more, and just tiny little things. But That's it, and that's why I think that's the first time I ever explained why it took so long um, to bring that out. But
I think that's
that's why.
important because we made a different choice. We decided to make an app because we wanted to also build our podcasting client into it. And
Yeah.
that made the most sense for us, was that we could provide offline podcast watching and a common place to find them and a bunch of other stuff that we just couldn't do in the mobile. Even though we have a mobile template, we just couldn't put all that into there.
Well, and see, stuff I didn't have that.
Yeah.
So stuff like that makes sense. Do an app and do it right and include all this stuff in there that you have. But for me, I had the site.
Yep.
And, do you do an app like that, or do you add all kinds of extra things in? I mean, yeah. Well, once you start doing that, then I start to lose the clean interface that the site is, and then the app becomes this big jumbled mess of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I didn't want that either.
And like
So,
you, we chose to give it away for free because, maybe we could have charged for it, but it just felt like it was a thank you to everybody who reads the site to make it as nice as possible for them to read it.
well, and that's part of our job too. That's
Yeah.
the business side of things. When we do something, we have to try and weigh out the pros and cons of each decision. And we could have revenue, or we lose revenue and we spend money, but it all comes out to making, if the readers are happy, they're going to come back.
Reader confidence to me is like a currency that's really, really hard to earn and really easy to waste. So you always want to make those decisions, trusting your readership and valuing your readership. We're just going to pause for a minute and thank our sponsor, Audible. audiblepodcast.com/iMore. We don't do a lot of sponsorships, but we do Audible occasionally, and it's a service that I personally use all the time. I am continuously writing and reading, and my eyes get tired. And as much as I love books, I just don't have the energy or the time to read books anymore. But thanks to Audible, I can listen to them. My co-host on Mac Break Weekly, Mr. Alex Lindsay, recommended a couple of books to me recently. One was No Easy Day, which is a book about DevGru, formerly known as SEAL Team 6, loosely interpreted as the movie Zero Dark 30. And the other one is Inside Delta Force, which was loosely made into the television show The Unit. Both are excellent stories, looks inside the special forces of the United States Army, and there might be a disconnect between Apple stuff and this stuff, but I enjoy these books because there is such a work ethic in the people involved. There are stories about people who are the best of the best and have to take it to another level. In No Easy Day, one of the first lessons learned by the candidate in the selection process for DevGru is that previously, all he had to do to accomplish his task was survive. If he finished the push-ups, finished the sit-ups, finished the running, he would make it through. Yet when he was in selection for DevGru, that was no longer enough. And he made it a point that every time he made a mistake, every time he failed, he would make sure that it never happened again. He would be conscious about it. He would look at what went wrong, figure out the solution, and implement it so that it would not happen again. And that's how he made himself even better. And in Inside Delta Force, all they had to do was walk. It was orienteering. All they had to do was make it from point A to point B, but they had to do it day after day after day across cross-country terrain, carrying huge packs and picking their goals very carefully, and they had to survive. People who were trained to do what they were told had to figure out how to accomplish their missions on their own, how to think on their feet, how to make decisions, and how to be a single person rather than a cog in a giant army wheel. And I thought, those were both lessons that just totally transcend any one occupation. And to me, that is similar to what we see in certain companies when good enough is not just good enough. When, as Steve Jobs said, he learned from his father, you paint the back of the fence. And they were fascinating reads. If you're interested in those kinds of things, they're just two of the many books that Audible offers. So check them out. You can get a free download if you go to audiblepodcast.com/iMore. Now back to the show. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about that kind of made me smile is we often hear this other meme that Apple's not innovating, and you mentioned it earlier. And often when you say, well, what do you mean? They'll say, well, Apple doesn't have widgets. And I'm not sure how that's an innovation because, Apple had widgets in Dashboard and other phones have had widgets for years. There's nothing innovative about widgets anymore, so I don't understand that whole argument. But HTC announced their new phone, the HTC One, and it's going to have a new version of their Sense interface. And they did a bunch of usability analytics before they announced it, and they put out some figures that showed that, for example, outside weather and clock, and I think one other one, only 10% of people actually use widgets, and they've been making widgets for a long time, since Windows Mobile. And I think 80% of people don't even change their home screen after a month when they bought a new phone. So for all these people yelling that Apple's not innovative because they haven't done anything they haven't done something that Apple themselves did back for, I think, OS X Tiger. It turns out that people are doing it, aren't even using it, and I thought that was particularly hilarious.
Yeah, it's funny when the companies tend to sell things based on a checklist. I
Yes.
think, and I've said for a while, so NFC checklist. And people go to the store and say, "Oh, but does it have NFC? Because I read that it should have NFC." Well, no, it doesn't. Well, I don't want that one. And well, what does NFC do? I don't know, but it should have it.
Samsung's new wallet, which looks exactly like Passbook, doesn't include NFC.
Yeah, funny, eh? Somebody asked on the in the chat room. Do you guys, you and I, Rene, think this year we'll see an all-new MacBook Air, not ARM-based, but the next level of airness? So not full-blown Retina, but much thinner. Seems everyone is managing to copy it close enough.
Apple, for me, I don't. Jim probably knows, but he's not going to tell me. But for me, Apple does these TikTok updates that they do a big change in one area, not everywhere at once, because that's really hard. So my guess would be that Apple still is going to work on the screen and work on things like battery tech, and then almost like we went from the first MacBook Air to the next one, there'll be several generations before that's nailed. I still don't think the MacBook Retina has enough graphics firepower to really control that Retina screen, so I think that there's going to be a lot of work ahead of that.
Yeah, and when you look at how thin the Air is,
yeah.
I mean, they can make the Air thin and make it in that wedge shape because they took out the optical drive. So and the graphics power is going to be the big thing, whether they can do that. So Apple will do these types of things when the technology comes around to be able to allow them to do it.
That's one of the big things. Like we often say, when's Apple going to do something? But if you look at Intel's roadmap or Qualcomm's roadmap, Apple can't do things until the technology exists for them to do it.
Well, yeah. I mean, they could have the ideas of things that they want to do. But if the technology isn't there, that's why, Apple buys all of these companies. And Tim Cook mentioned it during, I think it was the Goldman Sachs things, that Apple buys companies that they see technology in. We may never see what that technology does, but it could be a piece to something that they're working on over here. And they want to just slide that piece right in there, and then they close the company down, and we never hear about it again.
And he said, too, that they often pivot companies. Like PA Semi was a PowerPC company, and they decided to use them to reinforce their ARM efforts. So if they bought PA Semi and everyone says, oh, Apple's going back into PowerPC, well, that maybe not accurate.
Yeah. I mean, they see pieces of the pie all over the place, and there are some very smart companies out that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. I mean, we would never hear about a lot of these companies because they do a singular technology that means nothing to us, but when you put it all together, you end up with this great technology that Apple releases in their MacBook Pros that allows them to make it thinner or allows them to have Retina or whatever it is, and we would never hear about it.
I think that's one of the reasons why Apple has these interesting release schedules now. Like in the fall, we saw an iPad 4, which we usually only saw in the spring, but the LTE chip was there to do international LTE finally. The Lightning port was ready. The new chipset was ready. So instead of waiting until the spring, Apple just released the product. And that's when the technology met up with what they'd wanted to do with that product.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be interesting. when will we come a time when an iPad is enough?
Yeah.
I still think after looking at what Microsoft did, I still think that they were wrong, because their idea makes sense. We want one device,
Yeah.
but
It's between a tablet and an Air, for example.
yeah,
Yeah.
but when you try and put desktop applications on a touch device, it's not going to work. I don't care what kind of touch layer you have so that people can tap on the screen. It's still not going to work,
Or the
because
Pixel has single multi-touch display too.
yeah, and stuff like that doesn't make any sense to me. To me, that's more of the company saying we had this first. It's not about trying to help the consumer by saying you have this problem in computing, and we have a tablet that can help you. I don't see that from Microsoft.
I think also, though, I think there's an argument to be made that kids growing up now are going to be just used to touching screens because of the iPad specifically. So it's going to be natural to them when they sit at a computer to reach out and touch the screen. But they're also used to using iOS, and while the technology now is becoming instinctive to touch, that there hasn't been that sort of bridge to traditional computers. So your instinct might be to touch it, but the software is not there to support it. And I don't know if that's multi-touch or Leap or Connect or something, but there seems like there's still a gap between those two elements.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is a huge gap, and I really think that that Apple did it right in having apps that really respond to what you expect to do. When you put your finger on a screen and you drag, elements move, things happen. And that's why kids, and not to insult
old
older
people like me, that's not what you're going to say that, Jim.
But old people, kids and old people, look at this and say, okay, if I touch that and move, will it move over there? Because that's what you would expect to happen in real life if you pick something up and moved it. And that's what does happen.
And I think you're right that if Apple ever, it's hard to predict. What Apple does often looks obvious in hindsight because it's logical and it makes sense, but it's impossible to predict. And if there is ever a post PC device, I don't think it would be a MacBook running OS 10 with a touchscreen. That's not a product I think Apple would make.
People have asked me about a touchscreen on a Mac, and I don't get it. Maybe I'm too old or too stupid to get it. I don't know, but I really don't get it, because I understand touch on an iPad. I understand touch on my phone. I don't understand touch on my computer.
Even an iPad in a keyboard, where it is optimized for touch and it makes a lot more sense. There's still a layer of intermediation that seems to happen once you plug it into that keyboard.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe there'll be a time when the things that we do will require touch on a computer. But I tend to think that when that time comes, we may be moving away from the computer as we know it anyway. So it's going to be different. I mean, and that's part of the problem, that as consumers, we look at things as new technology coming into the products that we have right now. But that's not how it works. Mm-hmm. It's going to be new technology, 5 years, 10 years down the road, but there's going to be new products at that point too. And those new products will have evolved for 10 years. I mean, look at where we were 10 years ago. So I think that people, they do this when they say Apple isn't innovating anything either. But people need to not only look at what technology could do for us, but where that technology is going to take the existing products.
I don't know if you saw Napkin yet, the Guy English and Chris Parrish's Mac app, but to me that was an interesting move forward because they basically built an iPad app for Mac. They didn't make it a touchscreen app, but they made it so direct to manipulate that it feels like you're almost moving it around one to one like it does with your fingers on an iPad, but it does it in a Mac-like way. And I know you often said that, people say that Apple's making OS 10 like iOS, and that's not true. They're making it familiar, but it still uses Mac conventions. And to me, I think that's the differentiator. You're authentic to the Mac still on OS 10.
Well, and there has to be some familiarity there. I mean, Apple has so many new customers in the last decade, and the majority of those customers are iOS users, iOS first.
Yep.
So they had no intentions of ever buying a Mac, but millions of them have now. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense for Apple to say, okay, well, let's kind of make these things seem familiar and make them act familiar, notes and reminders and stuff like that. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it didn't hurt us as longtime Mac users. No. As a matter of fact, it made products that like Notes I now use because they don't suck.
See, one of the things, just to bring everything full circle, one of the things that I find most onerous and most aggravating about these Apple is doomed articles is that they waste all this time saying nonsense about Apple instead of going towards any legitimate points. There's no company that's perfect. No company is servicing every single user's needs. Right. And there are things that you could say, you can say Apple's cloud services Game Center was going down, or Siri still isn't as fast as Google search, or there's all these things. There's this leap forward in the future. And rather than, Apple's not innovating because they're not making widgets, what is Apple going to do to bring data to me in the next generation or so? There's all these interesting discussions that don't get had because the article that comes out is Apple is doomed.
Well, yeah. I mean, there are no discussions like that. It is interesting, though. I mean, when you look at what Samsung is doing and what Apple is doing, I mean, Samsung, let's be honest, they're the most successful on Android.
They're almost subsuming Android.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. But Apple has something that Samsung doesn't have, and that's that giant infrastructure. If you buy an Apple device and get iCloud, you can all of a sudden have syncing going on all in the background, and you can have your music and your media and your TVs, and you get an Apple TV and you plug it in, and all of a sudden all your stuff is there. And it's great. I mean, it goes beyond, Apple's infrastructure goes beyond whatever device you have in your hand at that time. Whether it's your Mac or your iPhone or your Apple TV or your iPad, it crosses all of them, everything. And I don't see any other company that really has that level of integration in any of their products. I mean, maybe Samsung will come out so that you can control your fridge or your air conditioner or whatever.
Yeah, and Samsung and LG have that kind of stuff going on.
Yeah. So, and I'm not making fun of that. I mean, people want that kind of stuff, so maybe they'll be able to do that and Apple won't. But I think that as this technology moves forward, and we've seen it in the past where companies come to Apple or Apple goes to them and says, we want, Chev or these car companies, BMW, we want you to have Siri eyes free.
Yes.
And they integrate that into their car. So now anybody that has one of those cars and an iPhone 5 can go and...
We want you to have beer cold.
Oh, I want beer. So you know what I'm saying? And that's one of these things where technology is moving both the products forward and the technology itself forward. So you have this intersection with the car makers where the car makers can put this in, and now your technology not only goes to your home, but now it's in your vehicle as well. And I find all of that very cool. And that's when you start to realize that, wow, this this stuff is getting pretty big.
Well,
You know, and
unlike
the things
Sony,
that
they
I
don't
can
own
do.
their own studio, but they can partner with Netflix and Hulu and HBO to put all those services on the Apple TV and the iPhone.
Right,
And
right.
what's interesting to me, and we've been saying this for a while, and it's becoming increasingly common, is that it seems right now that the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons can buy app developers and app designers and make their products prettier and in some ways better working a lot faster than Apple can build up the services infrastructure
Hmm.
that these companies have been doing for years. And services are becoming the table stakes. We don't even think about how often we use invisible online services, exactly what you said earlier. And it's not obvious that there's a next style company that Apple could just buy for services, and pull out all the different Oracle and what have you boxes and the ones that do Siri. I forget their name now. The company that does the Nuance boxes and throw those away and put in Apple products. You think that'll be a challenge for Apple? Because, his services hasn't always been their strong thing. Partnering in those areas hasn't always been their strong thing.
Well, Apple can do absolutely no wrong, ever. Now, I would say if Apple had one big struggle, it would be
Yeah.
services. That is where Apple is really falling down. And they haven't been able to get it right. And iTools started in the early 2000s. So, yeah, and their services started with iTools. You
Yeah.
had iTools, and then you had .Mac, and then you had Mobile Me,
It was
and
very nice of you not to mention eWorld.
yes, that's right. Well, that was actually eWorld was kind of cool, but it
Yeah,
didn't do anything. But so they've been working on these services for a long time,
Yeah.
and you would expect a company like Apple to have nailed it by now, but they haven't. And they try all kinds of different things. Oh, we're going to give you stuff on the web that you can log in and upload pictures from the web and build websites, and you can do all this stuff. Oh no, we're not. We're going to cancel all that.
There's an iWork beta that you can sign up for. No, forget about that.
Yeah, we're going to kill that. So they've been trying things, and honestly, I don't mind if they try things like iWork beta and say, here's what we're doing, and even if they cancel it, but it's kind of weird, that they haven't been able to really nail down what they wanted to do. With Eddie Q in charge now, I would expect that services will be a lot better. But it takes some time. Eddie's not just going to be able to go in and wave a wand and say, "This is it.
Conjure up a Robin
I
Williams
fixed
genie.
it." Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was Sock in the chat room says that they haven't nailed it yet, possibly because they're working on other more important things in the meantime. Well, yeah, that could very well be, but I mean, let's not kid ourselves. They were working on important things in that time beyond the services with the iPhone and iPad and iPod, iTunes, and all that kind of stuff.
And this is the company that brought us WebObjects. I mean, that was huge in its time.
Well, yeah, but I think even if they were working on technologies to help with services that are bigger than what they currently have now with iCloud, a decade is a long time.
Yeah.
And they should have had something. So,
or we would have seen a sign of it the way we've seen what they've been doing with Blocks and Clang and LLVM on the local software side.
Yeah, it just they just haven't gotten it there yet. Now,
I do think there's opportunity though, Jim, because I use Google products. A lot of iPhone and iOS users use a lot of Google services. Google Docs is wonderful for collaboration, but it's not so good that I wouldn't like to see a much better designed, much better interface competitor to them.
Well, no, I agree with that too. And there's another side to this whole argument about Apple and services. Usually, that argument stops with Apple needs to improve its services. But the second side of this that is usually written, as a joke or a headline or something, and if you're talking about the Wall Street Journal, the joke is in the headline. But when you look at that, you say, Google is becoming better at hardware faster than Apple is becoming better at services.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't believe that Google is becoming better at hardware. I mean, if you look at the Google devices, and I've had an opportunity to handle not the new Chromebook, but handle some of their other devices, they feel kind of cheap to me. I wasn't that impressed.
They're not actually. A lot of times they're not making their own hardware either. It's all outsourced to Asus and Samsung and the others.
I
But
don't
their
know.
design, like they did buy, they bought Snapseed and they bought Sparrow and they bought, I forget the other company, and you know they can have the Sparrow team make them a better Gmail app, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not. When I pick up a new Apple device, it's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, right down to the bezel on the side of his screen.
It's manufacturing porn, Jim. Let's be honest.
It is, and I just don't see that Google and people in the chat room are right. It's not Google; it's Google's partners that are doing this.
Yeah.
But Google has the final say to okay that hardware to go out to the public.
Jim, it's a laptop that costs more than Adobe CS6, but yet cannot run Adobe CS6. It stupefies me.
Yeah. So, there's two sides to that story. And, to say that Apple is failing on one side and then to not address the fact that Google is also, in my opinion, failing on the other side is wrong. But even when you look at that, there can be no argument that Apple does need to step up the game in services. As a user, I've been using it since iTools came out. I use mine to sync, all my data, and it does that. So I'm perfectly happy with the way that iCloud is because I get my contacts, my calendars, my notes that I use now. Everything that I sync from my computers to my iPad to my iPhone is there all the time. So for me, I'm a happy iCloud user. Developers are not so happy with iCloud.
In specific ways, like the key value store they're okay with, but syncing core data they're having trouble with.
Right. And that's not good. Mm-hmm. Developers should be happy with iCloud too, because that helps us as users. I want iCloud syncing in my apps
to be as delightful as the hardware is.
Right.
Which is interesting though, because it feels like Apple's at not a crossroads, but they're at a changing point, an inflection point, because you can look at iCloud, and to me, I did that article saying that Dropbox works great, but it's the old way of doing computing, and iCloud, it's not perfect yet, but it's the new way. And I really believe that, and I think if you look at iTunes 11, it's halfway across a chasm. And when you look at iWork not being updated, but being introduced to iCloud, there's like this next step that Apple's gingerly testing their footing on, and it's getting ready to put their foot down, and I hope very much that's the case.
Well, somebody has to bridge that.
Yeah.
And we just assume at this point that it's going to be Apple. But who knows?
Yeah. We're in for interesting times, Jim.
Yes, we are.
I want to thank you so much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to have you, sir.
Thank you. I enjoy it.
Where can we find out more about you and more about The Loop?
You can find me at Dalrymple on Twitter and at loopinsight.com. I'll actually put those in the chat room.
And if you're listening to this and you haven't looked at Steve Streza's Project Amy yet, and you are interested in having your app.net messages in your Mac messages client, then check that out, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. You can find me at Rene Ritchie on Twitter and app.net. You can find all of us at iMore. And for all of our shows, you can go to mobilenations.com/shows. If you haven't already, please head on over to iTunes. Please leave a review and a rating. It encourages iTunes to feature us, and that lets us find more awesome viewers and listeners like you. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Have an awesome night.